As you mentioned, I'm part of an organization called the Defense Institute of Security Assistance Management. Basically what that is a schoolhouse that teaches not only U.S. government personnel, industry, and our foreign partners about this general area of what we call security assistance, security cooperation. You'll hear me use that term interchangeably, but it really, security assistance is a subset of security cooperation. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is I'm here to talk to you today about foreign military sales. It's just one arena, if you will, under security cooperation. Other activities under security assistance are, as I said a minute ago, foreign military sales, the selling of excess defense articles to our foreign partners, leasing of military equipment to our partners, foreign military financing program, and one thing close to my heart is international military education and training, what we call IMET. What you'll notice through the next hour and a half, at least that's how much time I think I have to present here, is that this is an acronym-rich environment. We're dealing with the Department of Defense and the U.S. government, and they love acronyms. If I mention an acronym and I don't say what it is, please point it out to me so I can explain what the acronym means to you. Do we agree? Okay, good. Okay. Who we are. I'm, like I said, working at the Defense Institute of Security Assistance Management, but my boss is really the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, and what we do is we are the lead agency on the execution of security cooperation programs. And we have subject matter expertise. I've been working in this field for 21 years now. I don't know everything. I don't even pretend to know everything. I have some areas of which I'm familiar with, I've studied, I've worked it, I know how it works, but there are other areas that I know nothing about because it's such a huge endeavor. Okay? But we have subject matter expertise across the spectrum in this business. Now, one of the things I want to point out on these slides, no two projectors are equal. Because when we were doing this up at Everett yesterday, what we noticed was the screen and the colors on the screen were very vibrant. You could see everything. For some reason, this projector doesn't show everything, so I'll have to explain what's actually on the slide. It's hard to see. And you'll be seeing, I think you got handouts, right? Okay, good. Well, here's what we do in the security cooperation community worldwide. It's just more than foreign military sale. Basically, we're involved in partner equipping or building partner capacity. We will do things such as I mentioned earlier, IMET, International Military Education and Training, but building partner capacity. In addition to that, we do humanitarian assistance in counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism, demining operations. This is all part of the Defense Security Cooperation Agency in addition to foreign military sales. Now this slide up here shows you that we have about 10,000 people in this business within the Department of Defense working security cooperation. We do security cooperation, security assistance through what we call the Foreign Military Sales Program. And it's a very active program with over 13,000 what we refer to as cases, and I'll explain those to you later, what a case is. Basically, in a nutshell, it is a contractual agreement between the U.S. government and our foreign partners. And I'll explain that a little bit more. We do have international training, humanitarian assistance. We also run regional centers throughout the world. And probably more importantly, we have security cooperation officers that are located at the embassies in all the countries that we do business with. Now, why do I mention that? Because those are the people that if you decide to do marketing in a specific country, those are the people that are the points of contact when you go into the country. They will tell you who you need to talk to in marketing your products in the country. They won't advocate for you for your products. They are neutral as to which companies in the U.S., but they will advocate the U.S., that they buy U.S. Okay, you understand the distinction. They promote U.S., but they won't promote your company, especially if you have competitors. That's it, one of the things. Okay. Here is the perspective on security cooperation. It's all about building relationships. All about building relationships. This is what we're trying to do, okay, to support our national security and our foreign policy. I will be the first one to tell you that if it doesn't support our foreign policy and our strategic objectives of the United States, we will not sell it. Nor will we sell something to a country which will destabilize that region. Does that make sense? Okay. It has to support our national security and foreign policy objectives. And we consider it a tool of foreign policy to sell under FMS. Because what we're doing is we're building partnerships. We are building coalitions, if you will, to assist us in doing those things that we're trying to get rid of. For example, counting terrorism, counting narcotics. We're trying to build those relationships, okay? But we also recognize in today's environment, there is an increase of competition in the world in terms of who to market, who is buying what and from whom. 20 years ago when I started in this business, hey, you had a choice. You had foreign military sales, foreign military financing, and that was it. It was security assistance. There was no such thing as security cooperation. There was some infancy, but very little, okay? Increased competition, diminishing resources, and the importance has never been greater. Has never been greater, okay? So we have to posture ourselves in security cooperation, as it says there, success in this new environment. What is happening in the marketplace worldwide today, before the customer would come to us and say, we want this, and then the U.S. government would make that decision after they looked at foreign disclosure, did it meet our objectives, and we would sell it. Well, what's happening in today's environment, the U.S. countries and U.S. companies are not only the only competitor out there, there are foreign competitors as well. And when countries are looking for building up their capability, what is happening is they are going international. And as a matter of fact, there are a number of countries out there that must compete internationally. They will come to the United States and ask for a proposal. On top of that, we're seeing where countries are going and competing military department against military department within the U.S. You may have read in the papers recently in the last few years of where certain countries was in competition with the U.S. and other countries and they awarded the contract to another country because we weren't competitive. All right. When Vice Admiral Rixey, who is the Director of Defense Security Cooperation Agency, took over at DSCA, he looked at ways to improve our processes. And what came out of that review was what we refer to as Vision 2020, and it's a 6-year strategy to help the security cooperation business to synchronize our activities. And I'll show that to you here in a minute of how we looked at the process and what we're doing to make the process better. We're going to take a look at synchronizing the processes, how to meet our customers' expectation. And I'm sure you might have talked amongst yourselves that the way we do contracting within the United States government is a slow process. Do you agree with that? Raise your hand. Okay, it's very slow. And the reason for that is because there's so many different requirements that have to be met before we can actually award a contract. We're looking at that, see how we can streamline it through the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. We refer to them as AT&L to make it easy, okay? We're also trying to meet our customers' expectation. How can we get, when they submit their requirements and the U.S. government agrees to provide that material, how can we provide that materials, those services, and those activities to our customer faster? Because they complain too that we're too slow, all right? So the way we're going to do this is through efficiency and studying the processes and making it quicker. All right, so here's some of the things that we're looking at, these enterprise efforts. We're going to take a look at how we coordinate or prioritize our alignment of our activities, protecting manpower. We have people in this business that, frankly, come and go. We want to maintain that manpower, maintain that expertise in the workforce. For example, I've been in this business for 21 years. I'm not going to make it to 22 years because I'm leaving. And has nothing to do with industry coming and pulling me away and offering me a better job. I'm going to retire. I mean, this is my third career. I'm ready to do it. Okay? So we got to look at also, in addition to that, full spectrum training, workforce training. We have folks within this business that know very narrow area of expertise. For example, I'm a logistician. I pretty much know just about everything there is about FMS logistics, because that's the area I focused in, along with contracting and acquisition. Okay? So, but we want to broaden that education to take a look at things like international program security, technology security, foreign disclosure, for example, right? And just in those narrow activities. Okay? We want to be transparent in what we do. This is our number one complaint from our foreign customers. We are not transparent in what we do. Now, there are certain things we can't be transparent on. For example, when you submit a proposal to the U.S. government in a contractual action, are you going to allow, would you want the foreign customer to see your cost and pricing data? That was a question. Okay? No. And the reason for that is very obvious. They're a third party. If any of that information ever got out into the public domain, that would not be beneficial to your company. Would it? No, it would not. Okay? But there are other areas where we could be more transparent, especially in the acquisition world, in the contracting world. We can be. They can sit in on certain parts of the negotiations when it's dealing with, you know, what model, for example, what characteristics of the system that they're looking for, that sort of thing. So they can sit in. Delivery schedules, for example. They can sit in negotiations on. We want to do more case performance reviews. We want to take a look at acquisition timelines. I heard a statistic here about a year ago for aviation support equipment, aviation aircraft that takes anything on $50 million or more, takes on average 210 days from proposal to award of contract. Is that too long? Go like this. It's too long, okay? When I was working in industry, I was a contracts manager. I was doing multi-million-dollar contracts in a period of 2 weeks. Why does it take the government almost a year? Okay. Different system, I understand, because the U.S. government used the Federal Acquisition Regulation and the Department of Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplemental. Say that fast. Okay. All right. And we want to take a look at the technology transport exportability. Can we do things faster in the export releasability area? Okay. At the same time, when we sell something to our customers, we want to provide them with what is known as a full spectrum capability. We are not going to sell them something that 2 weeks after they receive it, it becomes what we call in the military a static display. In other words, it just sits there, it looks pretty, but it doesn't work because they don't have the sustainment capability of that system. In other words, they don't have the support equipment, they don't have the spares, they don't have the training, they don't have the publications to support that equipment and sustain that equipment for the life cycle of that system. Make sense? That's what we've referred to full spectrum capability. There's a subset of full spectrum capability that I'll talk about today. It's called what is called the total package approach. In other words, this goes in line with full spectrum capability in that we will sell them a full package in addition to the end item, so they can sustain that material. All right, so what is foreign military sales? I usually tell a little story here. 21 years ago, I was at the Naval Sea Systems Command, sitting in my office working as the business financial manager for the Phalanx program. Anybody know what that is? Okay, it's a Gatling gun, a smart Gatling gun that's on board ships to defeat incoming missiles. Okay, and I got a call from the contracting shop from a captain up there, and he says, "Hey, Hawk, you want to go to Wright Pat Air Force Base and work FMS?" And I said, "Captain, sounds great. I've never worked in a field maintenance squadron before." He said, No. This is foreign military sales. Well, that was the start of a love affair 21 years ago. Okay? So what is foreign military sales? It is a system, if you will, to procure for our partners and allies a sale government to government of materials and services. It's overseen by the Department of State. In other words, they approve it, but is executed by Department of Defense. Okay? Up here it says, Department of State supervises and determines which sales, leases, transfers will be made, and that's very true. Department of State says to DOD, yes, you can. But in addition to that, that's on the foreign military sales side of the house. On the commercial side, there's an organization within the Department of State called the Director of Defense Trade Controls. Us in the military and us in the DOD, we refer to them as DDTC. But in actuality, the Director of Defense Trade Control consists of three branches. One is the compliance branch, one is the policy branch, and one that's probably closer to your needs is the branch that issues export licenses for direct commercial sales. There's different export licenses, and I'm sure we'll talk about it as we go through this process. Okay? All right. But Department of State approves, Department of Defense executes those foreign military sales. In other words, the military establishes the requirements and determines if it's going to be a sale or lease, and we implement it through what is known as the Foreign Military Sales Program. Any questions up to this point? Okay. All right. Okay, within Department of State, they're basically responsible for the continuous supervision and direction of security assistance program. All right? Within the Department of State, I've already mentioned the Director of Defense Trade Controls, but you're wondering who within Department of State actually approves or looks at foreign military sales. Well, it's an organization called the Regional Security and Arms Transfer, or PMRSAT. They're the ones that take a look at the FMS side of the house. Commercial side of the house is DDTC. Okay. They will also take a look at the foreign assistance funding level. Now, in foreign military sales, how this is paid for is through the countries, the foreign countries' national funds paid in U.S. dollars. There is an element of security assistance, which we refer to as Foreign Military Financing Program, which is paid by U.S. appropriated dollars, your tax money, in other words. Okay? So they make the determination of what the funding levels are using U.S. taxpayers' dollars. And of course, Department of State approves license requests for commercial sales. I will be the first one to tell you that there are certain items in the ITAR, International Traffic and Arms Regulations, and oh, by the way, it's not just one regulation, it's multiple regulations under one, whatever you want to call it, okay? I just lost it there. Okay, so, and they will also approve third-party transfers. Now, what is a third-party transfer? We sell something to a country. When we sell something to a country, especially if it's a military article, then there are strings attached to that sale. And if they want to transfer it to their good buddies in the next country, they have to get the U.S. government's approval to do so, and it must be in writing. All right, so I mentioned earlier this concept about total package approach. We're not just going to sell them the end item. We're not going to sell them, for example, a ship or an aircraft or a missile system or a tank, for example. We're going to, in addition to that, we're going to identify what they truly need. They may submit a request to the U.S. government, to one of the implementing agencies, and I'll identify who those are here briefly. They may submit a request, but we may have to go back to our customer and say, well, what exactly is it that you need? And they may, for example, come in and ask, well, we need an F-16 aircraft, and that's fine. How many do you need? What configuration do you need? What model is it? A, B, C, D, E? Which model of F-16 aircraft? How do you want it configured? Okay? And we will always sell, if we can, those standard to DOD, Department of Defense. Now, why would you think that the U.S. government would want us to sell something that is standard? Put on your thinking caps, think about this for a second. One of the goals is interoperability, right? So if we're selling something that is standard to DoD inventory, it automatically is interoperable. Okay? So in other words, the comm systems, the radios, the radars, they all talk to each other within a system. So that's why we try to sell them standard. And there's a second reason, and it has to do with economic. Anytime we sell a foreign partner something that is what Vice Admiral Rixey refers to as a non-program of record, I call it non-standard, then it becomes more expensive to maintain that system. Okay, so we want to know what the initial support requirements in addition to that is. What type of support equipment, what type of spares that they're going to be needing, what type of publications, what type of training, and how that training is going to be conducted. Will it be in English, for example? Do they have to bring people to the United States to do training by DOD or by you folks in industry? Okay? What services do they need and what type of follow-on support? We're not going to just sell them a system and say, okay, here's your 2 years of support. You got the training. How are you going to support it after those first 2 years? And that's what follow-on support is all about. And that's what we mean by total package approach. We're not going to just sell them the system. Other countries do just sell them the system. All right. Let me talk briefly about this concept about the buyer-seller relationship. And I apologize for this slide. Like I said, projectors are different, but I think if you look at your slide set in front of you, it's a little clearer. If you look at the left side of this screen, you'll see where it says the Department of Defense Security Cooperation Community, and there's an arrow with the foreign government. When the customer decides that they want to buy something foreign military sales, then we will enter into an agreement. It's in a contractual agreement called a letter of offer and acceptance, or a LOA. Our customers refer to them as LOAs. But it's a letter of offer and acceptance, and what this is a bilateral contract between DoD and our foreign partners. Since it is a contract, there is some contractual elements that you must be aware of. If it is a contract, in this relationship, there is what is known as privity. That means, privity basically means that there's a special relationship between the parties and no third party can dictate to the elements of that agreement. On behalf of the customer, when the U.S. government and customer signs that LOA, the U.S. government, if we're not going to issue from stock, from DoD inventories, we will go out on behalf of our FMS customers and contract with U.S. industry, U.S. government, U.S. contractor, enter into contracts, and there's privity in that relationship as well. So there's really no contractual relationship between the foreign government and the United States contractor. There is a relationship, but in that scenario I just gave you between DoD and the foreign government and DoD and the defense contractor, which has privity, there is no privity that exists under that contractual relationship between the foreign government and the contractor. There is a potential for a contractual relationship between the foreign government and the defense contractor called an offset agreement, of which the U.S. government is not a party to. We do not administer. We don't even discuss it. If you were to ask us, for example, if you wanted to discuss your offset arrangement with the fictitious country of Bandaria, okay, we would tell you, go talk to the country. And the same thing, if Bandaria came to the U.S. government and asked us to talk about their offset arrangement with your company, we would say, go talk to the company. We are not party to it. We will not commit your companies to offset arrangement. As a matter of fact, the U.S. government is one of the few governments in the world that doesn't recognize offsets as a legitimate business. Make sense? But it doesn't mean you can't enter into an agreement with a foreign customer. Yes?
You may want to explain a little bit about offsets and what they might involve.
Okay, very good, thank you. Does everybody know what an offset is? An offset is a opportunity for a foreign government to enter into a relationship with a company to offset the outlay of national funds. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If the country is going to buy aircraft, military aircraft, they may come to, for example, Lockheed Martin or Boeing or whatever the case may be and say, for this sale, I would like for you to set up a facility in my country for the regeneration of landing gear, so I can build an industry in my country for future business and to build my industrial base. And the aircraft manufacturer may say, sure, we'll do that. That's called a direct offset. There's a different type of offset called an indirect offset, in which, as part of the sale, the country wants, for example, your company to market cuckoo clocks, marble statues, or whatever the case may be. Or they may want you to procure, which I saw was kind of interesting, was for you to procure, had nothing to do with the sale, diesel submarine technology. The country wanted diesel submarine technology. Now, that presents some interesting issues. Okay, first of all, what must the contractor do to provide that diesel submarine technology? The if they don't own the proprietary data. They got to probably buy it, right? They also got to get what else? An export license for it. Okay. So there's some other issues. Ankara, did I answer your question? No. Yeah. Okay. So an offset. If you take a look at offset arrangements between countries, first of all, in the aviation community, the latest stats I saw on it was more than 90% of all aviation sales had some form of offset arrangement. Yes, ma'am.
Is the timeline from proposal to contract award shortened in those?
Actually, they're separate. There's no connection between the two. A lot of times what happens is offset arrangements are negotiated before the approval of the letter of request. Okay? The question was, are they done together? No, they're separate. Okay? I'm trying to think of other examples. There's a number of different examples. Well, one thing I want to point out is there's no offset arrangements that are down. Every another country. For example, some countries may say, okay, I don't even want to consider offsets unless the sale is $200 million US or more. Some will say $50 million. Some will say, I don't want any indirect offsets, I just want direct offsets. Okay, so it's different. If you look at this slide up here, you will notice that this phenomenon called foreign military sales is in fact big business. All right. Up here, if you look at 2015, and it's hard to see here, that is over $47 billion in sales. So it's pretty active, robust business. If you look at the pie charts on the right, the U.S. is still the provider of choice. That doesn't mean we have competition, okay? And you'll notice deliveries lag agreements, and that's always the case. Always the case, because a lot of what we provide, especially ships, tanks, missiles, and stuff, we don't have those on the shelf. We have to go out and contract procure for those items. The secondary items, the spare parts and stuff, we typically have on the shelf, or we get from you and are put it in our stocks. All right, so this whole business is actually authorized under what is known as the Arms Export Control Act. There's three sections actually within the Arms Export Control Act, which typically DOD hangs their hat on. One is Section 21 and Section 22. Section 21 is the issue of material from DOD stock. Section 22 deals with the U.S. government going out and procuring items on behalf of the customer. Then Section 38 is what we refer to as credit sales. Okay? We do charge a fee. The U.S. government does charge a fee for this activity. The U.S. government has the expertise across the board to manage this program, and a lot of times we tell the customer under FMS is, let us do everything for you, and we will do everything for them, but we charge a fee for that, and it's 3.5% of the acquisition value, of the case value.
Is that a flat fee?
Yes, yes, sir. Flat fee. Matter of fact, my salary comes out of that 3.5. Business through what is called letter of offer and acceptance between the U.S. government and our foreign partners. Okay, but there are, like I said before, there are strings attached, and I refer to this as the TUP provisions. This goes along with international program security requirements that they must agree to, and they do, in the terms and conditions of the LOA. There's a whole section, there's 7 clauses in the terms and conditions of the LOA that emphasizes this transfer, use, and protection. And basically what this is they will not transfer something to another country without U.S. written permission. You will use these systems for all clearly defined What you can't do is very obvious. You can't attack your neighbor. Okay? If you attack your neighbor, then you will have sanctions against you, and the U.S. government will cease and desist all activities in this arena under foreign military sales for a period of time or forever. One of the things that we don't like is when they have a overthrow of a legitimate government. We stop right now any business we have with them. So they have to provide the same degree of security. In other words, they have to protect it. Does this mean that they have to have it in a Class 50 safe or something that is classified Class 50 safe in a secure building with concertina wire and guard dogs and stuff in exactly the same way the U.S. government protects classified material? No. But it's essentially the same. Okay? They may have to do it differently, but there's essentially the same degree of protection. Okay? And they also will allow us to monitor. Well, it's what we refer to as end-use monitoring. There's two types. Yes, sir.
What scrutiny is used to determine whether or not an item is under the foreign military sale? An example would be if I had a company that I made M15 rifles or MAC-10s, I'm going to sell those, that's obviously covered. I made AR-14s, that's a non-military. And I wanted to sell 5,000 AR-15s to some country. How would they scrutinize that to see if that
Is it covered?
even though it's not a military item, but it could be a military item?
The first wicket, if you will, is to determine if it's covered on the International Traffic in Arms Regulation. Okay. So, and if you've ever looked at that darn thing, what does it read? If you go in there on the section, I forgot what section it is.
It's category 3.
Category 3? Yeah. If you look, for example, if you look for the one on aircraft, you know, okay, I want to see if F-16 is covered on it. Well, guess what? All it says is military aircraft. Okay, it doesn't say F-16, 130, F-8. What's the general category?
The AR may be not a military firearm for purposes of domestic sale and use, but for purposes of the ITAR, it's still going to be covered for export shipments.
Right. There's an article in the news that Boeing is looking to sell a plane to Iran.
But
The non-military planes could be military.
no, they can't.
Well, but they could convert them to military planes once they have them. So how do you scrutinize that? Something that isn't military but could be, do they restrict that?
Mm-hmm.
Or you just cross your fingers and hope they don't do that?
But it would be very expensive for them to do that. Have to be.
Absolutely. Yes, there is. And this actually came up in Everett yesterday when we were talking about, is there any protection for the contractor? And the answer to that is absolutely. And the reason I say that is if you were to go into the Security Assistance Management Manual, which is the manual for security cooperation that's published by DSCA, Defense Security Cooperation Agency, in there it goes into quite lengthy detail about the terms and conditions of the LOA. And if you look at the first two sections, or the first two clauses of the terms and conditions of the LOA, what it does is delineate the rights of the U.S. government and delineates the rights of the foreign purchaser. And in Section 1, it says that Section 2 actually is the one I want to emphasize. If, in the event that the foreign purchaser defaults on the sale, then they are responsible for termination liability. Now, we just don't take them for the face value, unfortunately. What we do is we collect in advance and we collect termination liability in advance to protect the U.S. government and protect you, the contractor. Okay? In addition to that, we collect sometimes until they get into the regular billing cycle, 6 months in advance. We never deliver anything where they haven't paid for it in full. Does that answer your question?
It does. Does that also cover things like you mentioned earlier, when a country might get sanctioned for whatever reason?
We have all that loaded up front. Okay? It's collect in advance, all through it. Okay? Now, we may enter into contracts where they're not going to pay the full value of the contract up front, but we trust them to pay us as we demand it, but we're still collecting in advance in case we have to issue a work stoppage. We can make good the U.S. government and the contract. Okay? Now, then this is a perfect opportunity to talk about the law. The Arms Export Control Act says that the U.S. government will not take a loss in FMS. And that's the reason why we collect in advance. Okay? We will not take a loss. By policy, the U.S. government says we will not make a profit. In the aggregate, we do not, in the U.S. DOD, make a profit on foreign military sales. That doesn't mean you, the contractor, can't make a profit. And you should be, or you wouldn't be in this business. Okay, make sense? Okay. All right. Okay, so let's talk about the foreign military system. Up to this point, just a little bit of background, okay? Here's another one of the slides that just didn't quite make the transition. There are actually 5 swim lanes here. Okay, first swim lane is the partner nations, and you can see it on your slide set. The second is the FMS case life cycle, tech transfer, foreign policy review and oversight, and the acquisition world. All of these should be working in unison. If it works in unison, everything goes according to plan. But sometimes it gets hung up. And it gets hung up in a number of different areas. In the LOA build, where the DOD, or Department of Defense, is building the LOA, waiting for example, the Technology Security Foreign Disclosure through the Defense Technology Security Administration, or DTSA, or it may get hung up based upon the dollar value of the sale, may get hung up in congressional notification. You may ask, how long does it take congressional notification? Are there timelines? Yes, there are. However, maybe we have to wait a little longer to make sure that Congress won't say no. Okay? Now, with that in mind, I only know of one situation in the last 20-some years that I've been working this business where Congress was thinking about saying no. Now, getting congressional notification on a sale that meets certain dollar thresholds has some rules to it. The rules are, when we notify Congress that we're going to have this sale, Congress must be in session. Both houses must be in session. How often does that occur? Especially in an election year. I'm not being facetious, I'm just pointing out a fact. Okay? Forget about August. Okay? They're not in session in August, but there's a period of time where maybe the House is in session and then the Senate is in session, but not both. But you have to make the notification in DOD must make notification when both houses are in session. They may go on recess the next day, but they have to be in session. And here's the beauty of it. Silence is approval. Silence is approval. I'm not picking on our government, but if they don't say anything in a period of time, there's 2 criteria, depending on who the country is, if they don't say anything in that 2 period of time, by the way, it's 15 and 30 days, then it's approved. Unless they pass a joint resolution to disapproves them, which they've only thought about once.
So you always give them notice the day before they're about to leave.
Ooh, yeah, that works. That works. Yeah. Actually, we make notification to the congressional staffers, okay, to committees. Okay. Here's kind of an overview to let you know how complex this business is. The partner will submit a letter of request to what is known as the implementing agency. Well, there's 11 of them, implementing agency, but the vast majority goes to 3 implementing agencies, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. Okay? The implementing agency is going to validate this thing we call the letter of request. It is the request by the country for materials and services. The combatant command, that is the command that oversees the geographical region with the country that may be in their area. For example, there's CENTCOM, EUCOM for Europe, Central Asia for CENTCOM, Pacific, PACOM, SouthCom for South America, NorthCom, which is U.S. and Canada as well. Did I miss any? I think that pretty much covers it. Oh, AFRICOM. Okay. So the combatant man looks at it, and they may do what is known as a country team assessment, which I'll explain here in a little while. Okay. It goes through a National Disclosure Policy Committee, what we refer to as NDPC, or an exception to disclosure. Has to go through a congressional notification for a certain dollar value, and ultimately what happens is if everything works according to plan, we will issue a letter of offer and acceptance to the country for signature. So let's go into the finite process. But first, let's talk about terminology. I've mentioned the letter of offer and acceptance, but if you're talking to military counterparts or DoD counterparts, what they'll refer to it as an LOA, a case, or case identifier. They'll say something like BNYCY or YCY. What that is doing is just identifying a specific LOA. Like any contract, an LOA can change over time. I have seen where an LOA was signed one day and an amendment came the next day, or a modification. It's different than FMS. In your contracting with DoD, they don't have amendments. They have modifications, PMODs, procurement modifications. Okay? In the FMS world, we have amendments and mods, and it all has to do with this term called scope. My definition of scope is that which was bargained for. Anytime there's a major change in scope or a minor change in scope, then it's an amendment. If there's no change in scope, in other words, you're going to change something, but you've already agreed to it ahead of time, that's a modification. Okay. Let's briefly talk about the Arms Export Control Act, and there's various different terminology you should be aware of. One, it's the overarching laws, the Arms Export Control Act. That's bad, okay? Within the Arms Export Control Act, it authorizes the establishment of the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, plural. Okay, it governs both commercial and government. And within the ITAR is this thing called the United States Munitions List. Within the munitions list, there is what we refer to as excuse me, significant military equipment. If you look at the ITAR, you can identify significant military equipment by asterisks at the beginning of the paragraph. And then there's a subset of SME, which we call major defense equipment. Now, this is important for me in the FMS world because this identifies what is the main line on the LOA. Okay. So how do you define MDE? Okay. Get to it here. Significant military equipment is anything that costs $50 million or more. It's on a munitions list in development or $200 million in production. That's not very much money if you look at it in terms of things. Yes, sir.
Is that per contract or per agreement, those numbers?
Per system.
Per system.
Per system. For example, when I was working Phalanx, give me an example of that one. Well, I got a call from Navy comptroller one day, way back in the 90s. Okay, he said, "What's the research done, test and evaluation total cost?" And I said, And what they were trying to determine is what type of ACAT category it should be, right? Acquisition category. And I looked at that and I said, "You got to be kidding! You're way beyond 50 million. Okay, we're close to 1 billion. Okay, now what the odd part about this is it's not the RD and T&E. What the odd part of it is the production cost. You'll see that's 200 million. By the way, these numbers haven't changed in many, many years. $200 million. A NATO round. Okay, what's the NATO round? The bullet? Yeah, 5.56, right? Little old thing. You think we spent more than $200 million in the production of those rounds? So that's, there's a disconnect here somewhere, right? Okay, so there it is. Okay. Typically, what we concentrate on within DoD and when we're dealing with the ITAR is we're trying to identify MDE and SME because there are additive charges to the LOA cost because of it. Okay, we're trying to recoup the non-recurring charge, the RD-T&E, unless the country waives it. Okay. Here are the implementing agencies. You'll notice there are 11 up there. The first three, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, are the main implementing agencies. Now, why that's important is these are the interface for the customer to submit their letters of request. 94.6 of all letters of request from the customer goes to the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Now, for those of you wondering where the heck the Marines and the Coast Guard fit in all of this, okay? Can you want to guess? Navy, okay? Now, and the Corps of Engineers, that's under Army. COE is under Army. All these other ones, the National Security Agency, the Geospatial, Defense Logistics Agency, Information Services, and even the parent company, the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, even though they can accept letters of request, they have no active LOAs at this time. Even the Defense Contract Management Agency can receive letters of request, and you wonder, well, how does that happen? Well, the customer can go out to a direct commercial sales, and I think Mr. Ball was talking about it yesterday. They can go out with a direct commercial sales under what we refer to as a hybrid case, and then come to the U.S. government and say, "Hey, can you manage this commercial contract for us under an FMS case?" And the answer to that is yes.
Always?
Not always. They have to request it. If a country goes to your facility and says, "I want to enter into a direct commercial sales with you," you can manage it between yourselves. We don't care, other than you're buying U.S. Okay, we're frankly neutral if it isn't on an FMS only designation. All right, so let's talk about this system. How I'm doing on time? Emily, how am I doing on time?
You're good on time.
Okay. So let's take a look at the pre-LOR, if you will, okay, where the country is developing requirements. Okay, so you may find this interesting, but when the country is trying to develop one, if they're even going to submit an LOR, that is undefined time. There is no timeline. It may take months, it may take years for them to define what their requirement is. So basically, and oh, by the way, we use this country called Bandaria. Bandaria is a fictitious country that we use in the schoolhouse, so we don't identify any particular country. We don't want to say, for example, Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Yemen, or whatever country. We just said Bandera. We've actually developed a complete package with maps and everywhere of Bandera and their neighbors, Acadia and Zastavia, and the Gulf of Hormuz. Okay? And if you look at compare it to the global map, it looks suspiciously like the Arabian Sea and the Straits of Hormuz. Okay. Anyway, but that's Bandera. It's a fictitious country. They don't exist. But for teaching purposes, we use it. Okay. So what they're looking at, and strangely enough, the customer goes through the same process that the U.S. government goes through in determining what they need to, one, develop, need to buy, and this is called a gap analysis. Okay. What is the threat? How can we change our training or our procedures to counter that threat? And if not, maybe we need a material solution to the problem. That's the typical DoD solution, okay, in layman's terms. So they'll have to decide the mission, what the threat is. Do they have the budget for it? That's very, very important, okay? And other issues that they may have to consider are the political factors. How does the population feel about them coming to the U.S. to buy capability? We recognize that the customer can go to other sources. They can buy non-U.S. Okay? But if they decide they want to buy from the U.S., they have to make a decision with a few exceptions if they're going to go commercial or FMS. Either way, it has to be in compliance with the Arms Export Control Act. I've had customers come to me, I want to go direct commercial sales. Yeah, you can, most of the time. But because it's so much faster, no, okay? Because I don't have to worry about the Arms Export Control Act if I go direct commercial sales. Oh, yes, you do. Okay? In the Arms Export Control Act, Section 36B says sales through FMS. Under direct commercial sales, it says what? 36C, same procedure, but it's commercial. You're going to make a notification to Congress. Got to go through all of these wickets. Okay? They don't have to do that. They have to go non-U.S. But if they're coming through U.S., they have to be in compliance with the Arms Export Control Act. So they will spin this around, determine how much they, like I said, it's undefined, and they will eventually, if they decide go FMS, then we will take a look at, does it meet the U.S. strategic goals? Does it meet our policies? Okay. And we will also take a look, in addition to that, is there economic reality of them buying something? Sometimes the customers submit requirements that are unrealistic or become unrealistic over time. Back in the 1980s, I like to use an example of where one country bought were buying F-18 aircraft, and when they went under contract with the U.S. government, it was going to be about 10% of GDP, of the country's GDP, which is not bad, okay, for a one-time sale, all right? It quickly, because of fluctuating markets, monetary markets, they quickly became 80% of the country's GDP in 1 year. And that was not sustainable. So if you look at the terms and conditions, in which I encourage you to do in the Security Assistance Management Manual, just go to the DISAM webpage. We have listed all of our publications. And I'll give you my business card how to get there. Okay? But that became quickly unattainable because it had to be paid in U.S. dollars. So, but since this is a political process, if you look at the terms and conditions, it says, if you terminate, you pay. Well, that's not going to work, is it, if you're chewing up 80% of your GDP? But it's a political process. The U.S. government relieved them of their obligation, took over the payments of the F-18 aircraft, and the Marines are now proud owners of F-18 aircraft. That's how they got it. Okay? So it's a political process. Okay. I like to put this slide up because it's extremely important that our customers understand this. A lot of times they're focused on the production cost. What is going to cost me to get this system? That's true. But what they fail to look at, often, some do, fail to look at is what is the operational support cost of that system over its life cycle. The actual procurement cost is relatively little compared to the operational support cost. And give a good example of this. You go out and buy a Toyota Tundra today. What is it going to cost you? Okay? What do you think it's going to cost you? If you want all the bells and whistles, what is the Toyota Tundra going to cost you? About $45K, right? What do you think the operational support cost will have to be over its lifetime, assuming you're going to keep it for 15 years? It's not going to be $45K. It's going to be close to $100K over the life cycle. Putting gas, oil, maintenance, tires, right? That's what I'm talking about, okay? Now, one last point on this. If you, typically the research and development runs about 10%. If you depress that 10%, what happens to the other side? Production is going to stay relatively constant, but what's going to happen to operational support if you suppress the R&D and T&E? Yeah, very good. It will increase. Actually will go up if you don't spend the time in research and development. We're aware of this. Okay? Okay. Occasionally we will have to go into country with a survey team to ensure that there is infrastructure in place to, in fact, make it viable for us to sell that particular system to country. So we're going to take a look at their military capabilities and their infrastructure, okay? But if we do this, we're going to fund it using an FMS case, okay? And typically what we'll do is take you, our implementing agency personnel, and go around with the host nation making sure. Because the last thing we want to do is to sell a country a C-130J aircraft and find out when we make 1 month from delivery that the airstrip isn't long enough. Okay, kind of embarrassing, huh? And I use that example because things like that have happened in the past. Okay, so the customer decides that they want to submit a letter of request to the United States to the implementing agency in the United States government, and then we will start building the LOA, the letter of offer and acceptance. Okay. So we're going to go and build the LOA. Now, I want you to be aware that the customer doesn't have to request a contract. What they can also do is what I refer to as window shopping. In other words, they're coming to the U.S. and say, hey, how much does this cost? It's not a contract. They're just window shopping. This is what we call price and availability. We will submit to them within 45 days a rough order of magnitude of what that might cost. The U.S. government may not even come to you in industry in developing that P&A data. Okay? It's not sufficient for budgeting. They can use it to plan, but it's not an offer to sell. Or they could come in and ask for a letter of offer and acceptance, and then when we put the pricing together, it's a more precise estimate. Now you'll notice it says estimate. Because when we put together the LOA, we haven't gone on contract with you in industry, so we don't really know the true cost of the item. We have an estimate based upon our data. We may even come to you and try to get a rough estimate. Okay? But we maintain our acquisition data. We have a pretty good idea how much it should cost. Okay? So we're going to provide a cost based upon detailed data analysis, and this is sufficient for planning and budgeting, and it is an offer to sell. But I will tell you, it is an estimate. When we give the LOA, the letter of offer and acceptance, to the customer, it is an estimate in its cost. They agree to, in the terms and conditions, to pay whatever the real cost is. Not only is that, the delivery schedule is an estimate as well. Yes, sir.
Are there any rules to how close that estimate, are there any limits on that estimate?
Yes, there is. We have to notify them anytime there's a decrease or increase of 10%.
Pretty tight.
Huh?
It's pretty tight then.
Uh-huh. Now, does the case manager at the implementing agency always do that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Are they supposed to? Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Okay. You may be wondering, is there any specific format for a letter request? And the answer is no. Okay? No format. Okay? It can even be verbally. But if it is verbal, it has to have a memorandum for record for the files to what was said. Customer is responsible to ensure that the letter of request is complete. In other words, covers everything that they really want. Okay? And if they're using U.S. taxpayers' dollars, they have to identify who is the intended recipient in country for this material. Here's what we like to see in a letter of request. Now, I agree. This looks like a lot of information, doesn't it? But we're trying to strive for this thing we call total package approach. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes here talking about this, and the total package approach folds nicely into the full spectrum capability. Okay, obviously this thing, general information, is generally what you would see in a typical contract. You know, who the purchaser is. That's kind of a duh. Okay. Are there any prior agreements already in place with the country under a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement? For example, there may be manufacturing capabilities in country already established between, for example, Bandaria in the U.S. or a company in the U.S. It's a good idea to know about that before we put the LOA together. Okay. Any commercial negotiations that are going on, because the U.S. government is not in competition with industry, ever. Okay. Any special reports that they want? How do they want to use it in terms of interoperability? More importantly, when do they want it? When are they going to accept it? Okay. Are they conducting an international solicitation? Good to know information. Okay. Obviously, the major item consideration: how many do they want? What is the item? What is the intended use? What model configuration? And when do they want it delivered? They say tomorrow, it's going to be a little hard. There are a number of countries that do say that. I want it tomorrow. Okay? And it's not going to happen. Okay? Acquisition consideration. Sole source. Everybody know what sole source is? Okay? Sole source basically is different than single source. Single source is there's only one manufacturer out there. Sole source is they choose to only negotiate with one when multiple sources may be available. Okay? And the customer can request sole source. And if you read the Security Assistance Management Manual, Section 6, Chapter 6, it says that, quote unquote, the military departments are highly encouraged to honor the sole source request requested by the customer. Highly encouraged. It doesn't say shall or will. Okay. Are there any offsets? How are we going to fund it? Is there any financial waivers? Customer can request financial waivers. They can request waiver of non-recurring costs. Yes, sir.
So in practice, do those sole source requests that are customer driven come from marketing outreach typically, or?
That's a good question. And that never comes to the day of light. You may have done a very good job of marketing in country. Okay? I'd be careful how you approach that. Okay.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
I'll be talking about that a lot.
Yeah, that's why I said you got to be careful how you touch them. Okay. Financial waivers, the customer can request to waive the R&D and P&E costs, and they always do. And the reason they request it is because if we include it, the price is too much for the country and they can't afford it. That's what it tells us. Okay. There are other waivers, for example, contract admin service waiver, where we have reciprocal agreements with other countries where they'll do our quality audit, quality compliance for us. So they can waive it. There's reciprocal waiver agreement. There's only one country that has 100% reciprocal agreement with the United States, and may surprise you what country that is. You think it might be England, Canada, or Germany. No, it's France. What a strange. Okay. What type of training they want? Do they want DOD or U.S. Contractors to do whatever the case may be? Service consideration, type of service, period of performance, program reviews, how often they want them, training, very, very important. You don't want to sell an aircraft without providing pilot training. Doesn't make sense. Okay. All right. And here's probably the single most important area on the letter of request. How is the country going to operate that equipment, right? What's their maintenance concept? What's their supply concept? Because the U.S. government, and especially DOD, maintains what is known the mean time between failure of parts. We have very robust databases that we know operating a specific weapons platform within the United States and various other environments, what the mean time between failure of a given part is. If we do not know what the operational concept is, where they're going to be fly it, how they're going to fly it, how many hours they're going to operate that, what do you think DOD is going to default to? DOD, mean time between failure criteria, okay? So it's very important that we know what their operational concept is. What is their maintenance concept? Do they have organic access in country to do maintenance? Field level, what we refer to as field level maintenance? Or do they don't have the expertise in country and they're going to have to ship everything back to the United States or a third party for maintenance? Got to know that, okay? Especially jet engine. Supply concept. How are they going to do their supply or resupply of parts? Are they going to do it commercially, which they can do? They can come to you and say, I need these parts, or you just get an order every periodically for a part and you ship it to them. And have an export license to do that. Or it's under an FMS case, so you don't need an export license. Okay? They still come to you for that question. What is their initial spares? Do they want 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, initial spares? And the purpose behind initial spares is to keep the system operational so they can get into some other support system, either a blanket order case under FMS or a commercial viable option. What type of support equipment do they need? Do they need a site survey? What publications do they need? From time to time, we get requests from our customers to translate our publications, which are in English. Can they do that? The answer to that is yes. But if there's a problem, what does it default to? English. Okay. How about warranties? What's the standard warranty? What does your company offer as a warranty? Or do you have one? DoD typically asks for a 1-year warranty, which I find interesting because it's usually, because in the statement of work it says a 1-year no-cost warranty. Yeah, I used to laugh at that one when I was in the industry. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Okay, 1-year warranty. But can a customer ask for a 10-year warranty? And that's typical for missiles. Can they ask for it? Yes, they can. But who pays for it? Who pays for that 10-year warranty? The customer does. There's a cost to extended warranty. Okay? So we pay particular attention to that in any follow-on support. And does the customer have this, what is known as a freight forwarder? Has anybody ever heard of that term before? Okay, that is under contract with the foreign customer to move freight from the United States to ultimately their destination country. And they're under contract with that country. They're called freight forwarders. We don't want pilot pickup. Pilot pickup is a pickup by ship or aircraft at a military port of debarkation. Okay. And I saw something down there. Air is going. Or they want everything by air or everything by surface. Now that's important to know. Because which one's more expensive? Air. So these are all the things that we like to see on a letter of request. And this letter of request typically goes to the security cooperation officer in country who will review it, maybe ask a couple questions, then forward it on to the implementing agency. And I'll show you how that works here. If their customer or anybody wants to take a look and see how this is built, there's a number of reference tools that you can use. Within DICEM, we have our own writing guide. The Army has specific checklists that they can use, and along with some reference guides. The Air Force has an automation tool to writing letters of request, and the Navy has just what we refer to as information. All right, so the LOR is written. So now it's going to get submitted, and typically the way it's submitted is with a copy to the embassy in country. Now there's a reason for that, and I'll talk about it here in a minute. The copy will go to the combatant command, CENTCOM, EUCOM, PACOM, whatever the case may be, and an action item, those are info copies. An action item will go through the Defense Security Cooperation Agency and one through the implementing agency. Now, the implementing agency is the one that will be putting the letter of offer of acceptance together to develop the LOA. Okay. But depending on what the item is and the dollar value and the sensitivity of the item to one particular country, the ambassador's team, which consists of the SDO-DAT, defense attaché, and the security cooperation officer in country, will be tasked to put together what is known as the country team assessment to be signed by the ambassador in country. Okay? When these country team assessments are done, is typically if any time a congressional notification is going to be required. Okay? Or when we introduce a new capability into a geographical area or the country, or if the item is sensitive in nature. Now, what do I mean by sensitive? How many have heard of the Missile Technology Control Regime? It is a regime signed by 34 different countries that says the U.S. is one of the members that says we will not sell articles that have the capability of weapons of mass destruction. Now, what am I talking about? Global Hawk, Reaper, Predator, anything within the Missile Technology Control Regime, within the ITARs, that says Category 1. Anything capable of weapons of mass destruction, or any item that can be modified to become a weapons of mass destruction. Okay? So, of sensitive nature, anything requested by DSCA. Okay? Here's the country team assessment. I know it's hard to read. It's in your thing. But there's a standard number of questions that must be asked and answered by the country team And if there are sensitive items, there are additional questions that must be answered. The bottom line is the ambassador will approve or disapprove or recommend approval or disapproval for that weapon system and their geographic area. Okay. All right. One of the things I want to point out is, as all of this is going on, when the letter of offer is being built, then all of these activities that I'm going to point out here are ongoing. In other words, we are starting to build the LOA. We're going through technical review. We're coordinating with Congress, and we're looking at the price and availability and the scheduling for acquisition. All of this is going on simultaneously. If you look at your slide set is better than this slide up here, okay? But there's all kinds of different things going on. But what I want to concentrate on is this congressional notification phenomenon. So the American Embassy, the local mission, receives the request. I talked about that earlier. The implementing agency receives it. Might be the MILDEP, okay? Could be a DLA review, Defense Logistics Agency. Defense Security Cooperation Agency reviews it as well and starts the coordination with Congress. And they will coordinate it through the Department of State and Congress, congressional staffers actually, okay? And within Department of State, the PMRSAT will take a look at it, will recommend approval, denial, okay? They'll coordinate it through the National Security Council, and they'll start doing the pre-consults with Congress, especially with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Okay?
Do you have a case officer or a point of contact that helps you walk all of those steps?
Yes. The individual is within the Weapons Directorate at the Defense Security Cooperation Agency. They're coordinating with Department of State, and the Department of State is coordinating with the HVAC and HFRC, SFRC. All going on simultaneously. In addition to congressional notification, guess what else is happening? We're taking a look at foreign disclosure considerations. Okay? DITSA, Defense Technology Security Administration, under Beth McCormick, is looking at how, if we should release this, okay, through the National Disclosure Policy. So a lot of different moving parts at the same time. Okay? All right. So here it is graphically. Okay? So the implementing agency, once they receive the formalized letter of request, they have 10 days to report to DSCA certain information. What it is, the cost, is there offsets, and does it come to what type of sensitivity of the material it is. Okay? DSCA gets it, starts coordinating with State Department. It's what we call this tiered concurrent review. Are we submitting or inducting a weapon system into a particular country that will give them significant military edge over another country? You've got to be careful about that, okay? Especially in the Middle East. Okay? So this is a tiered concurrent review. Eventually, once it's worked out, say, okay, let's go ahead and submit the notification to Congress. Congress has to be in session, like I said before, both houses. Now, depending on who you are, then how long the formal notification or statutory notification takes place. For example, if you are NATO or NATO countries are one of 6, Japan, Australia, South Korea, Israel, New Zealand, or Jordan, you only have 15 days notification. At the end of the 15-day notification, you're good to go. You can release the LOA, it becomes part of public record, and by the way, it is public record unless it's a classified LOA. Okay? Then it's good to go, and you can release it to the country for signature. We can actually release a draft LOA to country at a certain point before the signature is assigned by DSCA and the implementing agency, but it won't have the seal at the top left hand corner. All others, it's a statutory 30-day. We still use the term 20 days informal, and that's what this tiered concurrent review, it's kind of like a 20-day period where we're coordinating the process between Department of State, Congress, and Defense Security Cooperation. All right. There are different types of LOAs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because typically you don't see these in industry. Basically, a defined order of case is for major defense equipment, significant military equipment. I mentioned that earlier. Okay? Or any type of system which we determine to be sensitive. In other words, the difference between this and other types of LOAs, we have finite numbers assigned. For example, 94 missiles, 24 aircraft at a particular time. There's numbers assigned, whereas the other two are just a dollar value. There's no quantity. In other words, all it says on the LOA is repair parts in support of C-130 aircraft, or repair part in support of M1A1 tanks, right? And then there's a dollar value, no quantity under unit price or total price. Usually used for follow-on support, training, and publications, but not for classified. Okay? Cooperative Logistics Supply Support Arrangement. In my business, we call these CLSAs. Try to say that 5 times fast. Cooperative Logistics Supply Support Arrangement. Basically, this is where the customers buy into the DoD logistics system, and they're treated equal par to the DoD forces, Army, Navy, Air Force. All right. There's also a phenomenon we call pseudo-LOA. These are where it is an FMS, but we use the FMS system to provide materials to our partners under what is known as builder partner capacity. In essence, what this is the U.S. government selling to the U.S. government. It's different under FMS, title transfers at origin. In other words, when the material leaves your loading facility, loading dock, then the customer owns it. You're not responsible from that point on for loss or damage. They do. Title transfers at origin. That's the way it works. Okay? Under BPC, if they're issuing it, the load come from your loading dock, it's the same as FOB destination. Okay? The U.S. government still owns it all the way until delivery in country, where the customer signs a hand receipt. That's where title transfers. And it's interesting, if you look at the terms and conditions of what we call pseudo-LOA, there are no terms and conditions. All there are is notes. There's no rights of the parties because the U.S. government is selling to the U.S. government. Okay? All right. Where are we at here? Okay. Then we're going to sign the LOA. We're trying to get the customer to sign the LOA. And one of the questions came up yesterday was, do they sign it all the time? No. Sometimes they get cold feet back out. But there's a high percentage of them that the customer does sign. Why would they go through all the effort of submitting do all that research and submit their requirements if they're not going to sign it? And they do most times. Okay? Now, there is some timelines that we have to do this process and get it to the customer. This is what we call anticipated offer date, or AOD. We are going to provide the material, hopefully, in a very quick manner. Okay? So, and one of the reasons why I brought up this blanket order, LOA and CLSA and defined order, because timelines are different. Okay? And on the left-hand side is your group categories, A, B, C, and D. In the middle is the timeline, and we will try to provide that letter of offer and acceptance for the customer's signature. Now you'll say, wait a minute, 150 days is a long time. But you know what? Did you look at the process they had to go through? No kidding why we're doing the Vision 2020. We're trying to speed that stuff up. A lot of different wickets it's got to pass to get there. So on complex buys or complex integration issues through multi-military departments, we only have 150 days to do that. And believe me, that time goes fast. Okay? How long does it take you to put a proposal together? Don't tell me 10 minutes. Okay? I was in Austin, Texas back in 98. No, 2005. Putting together a proposal where I worked 16 hours a day with a team for 45 days putting a proposal together. Yeah, guess what? 45 days. Now the government's doing something like that on the other side. Okay? So 150 days is not a lot of time when you got to coordinate between the systems program offices, you coordinate between DITSA, DSCA, and all these other organizations. But if you can look at the areas that we could streamline or increase its efficiency, then we can actually reduce these times. Okay. But for blanket orders, 45 days, all you're doing is throwing a number, dollar value, on a one-line case, one-line contract, if you will. Okay, 100 days for defined order case LOAs, which are the routine ones. We've sold this in this region before. We could sell them again. No big deal. Put it together. We got the history. 100 days. Okay, 150 is complex, and 60 days for all pseudo or blanket building partner capacity LOAs. Okay, so how does the acceptance work? Well, country signs it, sends it to the implementing agency, and hopefully at the same time sends an initial deposit to our banker, Defense Finance Accounting Service in Indianapolis, Indiana. So what happens if they don't submit the initial deposit? Nothing happens. Okay, because remember, we collect in advance. We want that money up front because we're not going to do anything. We're not going to even go on the contract until that initial deposit's in place. Now, this is not an issue. Many times it identifies in the LOA what the initial deposit is, and sometimes people think it's a percentage of the total case value. It is not. What typically it is what's occurring from the time period of the signature of the LOA until they get into the regular billing cycle where we collect in 3 months in advance for all activities. Kind of an interesting system how they do this. So, all right, so customer also has an offer, what is known as an offer expiration date. In other words, we will submit an LOA to the customer for signature, and they have a set period of time to sign it. This is what we call the offer expiration date. It's typically 85 days, 60 days to signature, and 25 days for administrative lead time. That's the default. There are countries out there that need extra time. Notably, Middle Eastern countries, Singapore, for Saudi Arabia, need sometimes 180 days. It's a long time.
Why?
Why? Because the way they're structured in their government, there's only one person typically can sign that. Okay? Singapore needs 120 days. Give you just two examples. Okay? Not all Saudi Arabian entities need 180 days. There's the Royal Saudi Air Force, there's the Royal Saudi Navy, there's the Saudi National Guard counterpart. They have all different times. There are permanent exceptions, which I just mentioned. They can ask for an extension. And I tell our customers, anytime you ask for an extension, your cost and your delivery become more of an estimate. Up front it's an estimate, now it becomes more of an estimate. Because a lot of times when we put together those estimates, we are looking at things like production line, what's happening on the production lines in your facilities. And if you're going to shut down that production line in 2 weeks, and I'm trying to piggyback it on existing production line, guess what happens? Price goes what? Up. Is there such a thing as production startup costs? True? Okay. All right. We also can have short OEDs. But if we have a short OED, offer expiration date, we've got to know the customer and why we're doing it. Example I gave on the production line, yeah, you're going to sign this in 20 days, buddy. We need you to sign to get in the production line. And they typically do. Okay. And once it's signed, we will implement it. And it usually takes 10 days, 10 to 15 days to implement. That's what the regulation says, but in reality, it's electronically. It takes 2 to 3 days. One of the things we're very good at. Okay, implementing cases. Okay. The rest of it is what we refer to as an active case. It's called the case execution phase. That's where you get involved because we're coming out to you for proposals saying, can you provide this? What is the cost? What is your delivery schedules? Let's sit down and talk and go through the formal contracting process. Okay? And they asked me just talk about the left side of this and not talk about the active cases, so I won't, but I can if you need to. All right, a couple of things that you should be aware of. Yeah. In the regulations, the Security Assistance Management Manual, in the LOA, we notify the customer that we used the federal government's acquisition contracting regulation, federal acquisition regulation. So any proposal that any request for proposals that you get from us under foreign military sales will be under the guidance of the Federal Acquisition Regulation and Department of Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplemental. Competitive procurement is the norm. It's the default, if you will, unless the customer requests sole source. Okay? All right. Of all the slides that I showed you today, this is probably the single most important one. These are points of contact. Okay? Mark it down, do whatever you want with it. Okay? It's in your slide set. Notice at the bottom down there, Foreign Commercial Sales Service, FCS worldwide, and it's kind of cut off on the screen down here. But take a look at the very, very bottom. It talks about the SCOs and, coordinate. If you decide to market in country, get a hold of the Security Cooperation Officer in country so they can coordinate with the Ministry of Defense for marketing activity. It's always good to know who is the person with the authority in country. Don't be wasting your time. Okay? All right, questions? Yes, sir.
Is it possible to get this slide in an email? I've got old eyes and I can barely read half of what I got down here.
Yes, we'll be emailing out to everyone links to the PowerPoint slide.
It's a 9 megabyte file. I'm just telling you up front.
Yeah, actually, the email won't include the PowerPoint. It'll just include a link on our page where you can go to access it.
Great, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
The process that you discussed and the graphic that you showed how the United States and acquisitions are compared to other countries, are all of those other countries, does everybody operate under the same process?
No, they do. The question was, does the other countries operate under the same processes that the United States government does for foreign military sales? Absolutely not. Each one is different. Some industries, I don't know if you're familiar with various countries, but some industries are actually embedded in the governmental processes, whereas industries are not connected within the United States at all. So the processes are going to be totally different. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir.
Are there instances where you can say subject to availability? We've recently had a request for as a commoditized product, it's high volume, simple parts. Of course, to meet the ITAR requirements of the actual spec, it had to be more than 50% manufactured in the US and so on and so forth. There's a limited production run of that. They were available at that time, but were diminishing as every day goes by. So yes, we could bid at that time based on inventory available.
Yeah. What he's referring to is the Buy American Act. Okay? No barium issues? Okay, good. Because I got in trouble one time for that. So are there any, what your question is, are there any deviations from it?
Yeah, I mean, how do you write that in? How do you include that in your bid or in your contract? Because it's a moving target. You
Yeah,
can't
it is.
define. We have a really hard time saying that there's this many inventory crap, because we don't have control over it.
I've always, when I was in industry, I always told them up front, I said, communicated to the contractor and also say, hey, listen, some of these will be OSP, okay, offshore procurement. and, and go from there. Okay. By the way, under FMS, offshore procurement is authorized. If you build your case.
We can talk about it later, but there, you can add a section in your proposal of qualifications. And that's always helpful. Thank you for that.
No, there's a whole section in the security systems management that talks about offshore procurement. And we recognize within DoD that we're not the lead on all technology. I mean, when I was in industry, it sounds like a broken record, but I routinely had to go to the UK for certain type of comm equipment, okay? Because we didn't make it here. Medical equipment, go to Italy. Strange on that. Okay? Any other questions? Dave, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pat. Appreciate it. Nice presentation.
Thank you.